right, we're started.
Let's go.
Okay, so here we are. We're going to go around the room very quickly. I'm Barb Jones, and here we have
Adamich.
Hi, I'm Ricky Sipila.
I'm Becky Prang. Jody Chaffin.
Mary Louise Eisenhower.
Nancy Vanderbilt.
Roger Howell,
And I'm Todd Powell.
Steve Jones, Brian Downing, Glenn Landy, Bill Teff,
And next to Bill Teft, Hudson Kingston.
Okay, so who starts?
Well, and we also
Ricky?
have Ann and Richard
Oh, that's right.
online,
Oh,
so
thank
you
you.
will get some questions
Very good.
from the internet.
I'll see it.
Well, okay, so I'm going to speak loudly enough that I think the recording can hear me. My name is Hudson Kingston. You guys have met me before. I live out on Garden Lake, and I am just introducing this topic because I know Ricky and I made him come here. Ricky doesn't live in Ely yet, but you know,
You never know what'll
if
happen.
he installs enough solar panels up here, he'll have to move. But he has already helped the work of Ely Climate Group by donating that half-broken solar panel that's in the hallway. And he has installed solar panels on my roof and is interested in doing it for other people you know the names of in our community. I am going to very quickly and seamlessly, with no technical errors, share my screen just to give everybody sort of a sense of what we're talking about here. And so everyone online and also everyone in the room should look at the TV and see, this is just some drone footage that we took in October. And those are the 12-year-old panels that my mom installed. Those are 200-watt panels, a little more than that, but you know, there's lots of math involved. And then everything here you can see is where panels are now, 33 new panels, which are almost 400-watt panels. And a lot has changed in the last 12 years. I don't control this drone video. It's just random video. Not really any of it, but the trees look nice that day.
Which way is south?
South is behind us.
Okay.
So
where is this building?
Garden Lake.
Oh, this is.
Yep, and this is our solar installers hard at work. And I can guarantee to you right now that is all covered in snow right now and producing zero electricity. So we got it all in on November 8th. Sorry, Ricky got it done in October, but you still have to get connected by the utility. And that got done on November 8th, and we have produced 115 kilowatt hours since then, which is very little, because it has been November and December. So this is part of Ricky's presentation.
I always have to tell my customers when we finish our installs at this time of the year, hold your breath for at least the next couple months here.
But this is what it looks like while it's happening. And this is the man of the hour, our friend Ricky, who now will be able to talk intelligently about why people sometimes get solar panels on their houses.
Indeed.
I will run your slides for you.
Very good.
You're going to tell us how much it costs?
Ricky can tell you how much it costs and why
Sure.
it's a deal.
Yeah,
if you think about
absolutely.
it.
This was a little interesting because Hudson provided his own panels, which I don't see every day. Usually I'm getting everything. But I'll get into a little bit about solar finances in this presentation here. So I'll just start talking here, and if anybody has any questions, feel free to raise your hand, stop me, and I'm happy to answer questions as we go along here. But as I said, my name is Ricky Sipila, and this presentation is to kind of explain a little bit about solar, a little about what I do, and let's go to the next slide here quick. I started my solar journey, I would say, in college, which was only 7-8 years ago at this point. I graduated from the U of M in 2021, and I actually started my solar journey in a club called the U of M Solar Vehicle Project. And in college, we would build electric cars that we would put solar on the roof of. And then there would be a bunch of teams all around the world, and we would put them in these competitions and race them across country to see, you know, whose car was the fastest and who's, you know, held up the most. And that was a lot of fun. Unfortunately, I was not necessarily part of the engineering team of that crew. I was more part of the operations finance division, but that ended up actually helping me a little bit more, in my opinion, you know, for starting a business and such.
What's your degree in?
My degree was in industrial and systems engineering.
Oh, okay.
And for those who don't know what that is a very high level engineering degree that goes into optimization of businesses and processes and stuff. And the way people sell it is it's a mixture of engineering and business combined, which is why I went into it. And at the last part of my college experience, I got an internship for a different solar installation company called True North Solar. And I worked there for about 3 years, where I learned the tricks of the trade. And so once I graduated college, I was well, let's see what I can do on my own here. And knowing that if you look on Google Maps and try to search for solar installers across the state of Minnesota, there's just this wide gap of no installers around the range. And I'm originally from Virginia. I graduated from Virginia High School in 2015. And so I put my little dot there. So if people look for installers, you'll find Sisu Solar here on the range. And that's kind of been my goal, you know, from day one, is try to bring more solar into northern Minnesota. And
Can I ask a question?
yeah, absolutely.
Why?
Why? Well,
I mean,
that's a deep question. And my passion is the the environment. And I think the climate crisis right now is one of the biggest issues in our world. And so that's kind of what has driven me so far. Why don't you hit up the next slide here, Hudson? So I'm going to go over, to start out here, what solar panels are, solar photovoltaics, kind of the electricity and the circuitry behind them, and how they convert sunlight into electricity. We're going to then go over what the finances of them look like. And then lastly, we're going to go over talking a little bit more about the climate and such. That picture there is actually one of the first systems we ever installed. It was just a small 9-panel system in St. Paul. Even though my whole goal here is to try to install panels on the range, I do install all over Minnesota, and about half of our projects right now are in the Twin Cities, because that's where the demand is right currently. Hudson, you can go ahead forward and let's show an example. This is a system we installed last year in Edina, where there was a house, a newly built house, and this system that you see right here is a grid-tied system. I know most people in here have off-grid systems, and so I want to go over a little bit about the different types of solar PV systems. The first one, which is the picture of this grid-tied one, it's also the same one Hudson has, is grid-tied. But then on the other hand, there's off-grid, and obviously the difference between the two is these panels are connected to the grid. This house still uses electricity from, in this case, Xcel Energy, in Hudson's case, Minnesota Power. There are also off-grid systems where you are not connected to a utility at all. You have solar panels, you have a generator, you have batteries that are all a self-contained system, not connected to any other house or any grid. There are also systems that we install called multi-mode systems that are solar plus batteries, and they're connected to the grid. And those systems are kind of made so that you can get the benefits of the excess electricity you produce, that you sell back to the utility, and you have those batteries for if the utility goes down, if there's a grid outage, then your house stays up.
That's your generator.
But for the majority of the systems that installers across the state are doing are these grid-tied systems where it's just solar panels connected to an inverter, connected right to the grid. We'll go over a little bit more about how that works a little later. You can continue on. So, getting really down to how solar panels work. The panels themselves use silicon cells that are I'm not an electrical engineer here. I'm gonna start off, but the basics of it is there's like a semiconductor that when it's hit by sunlight, it'll make electrons move. How it does that, I'm not going to get down to that level, but you're going to get some moving electrons. Those electrons are what we call DC electricity, the same electricity that's in like a car battery, where it just goes in one direction. The electricity that we use in our houses is AC electricity, where the electricity is not actually just going in one direction, it's actually moving back and forth very quickly at a high frequency. And so it's just a matter of collecting that energy from the solar panels, putting into what we call an inverter. Inverter is converting that DC electricity that was just made from the sunlight into your household 240, 120 volt single phase power. And then that electricity is used to power your home. That electricity is being backfed back to the grid if you are overproducing electricity. And then, of course, the energy storage is there connected to the inverter as well. If people have batteries, that's also DC electricity. It is important to note that when we have batteries, storage devices, those are not necessarily creating electricity, right? Those are simply there to take in the electricity from either solar panels, a generator, any type of electrical source, and then store it so that it can be used for later. That's kind of what it boils down to. So this picture we have here is another system I installed, I want to say 2 years ago in Aurora. It's a system that's on a flat roof. This is actually one of the first systems in Aurora that was installed. There's not too many in the city. This picture here I want to represent of all the different places you can put solar panels. You can put them on flat roofs, you can put them on pitched roofs, whether they be asphalt shingles or metal roofs, or my personal favorite, you can have them just as a ground mounted solution. So if you just have a yard that has, you know, a lot of sunlight hitting certain areas, you can just put the panels there and have them tilted at whatever angle you want. Question?
We have a situation, not on the ground, not on the roof, that I haven't seen any installer ever talk about, but I think it's worth considering. And so add this to your, we have a high deck. They are on the front of our deck, which means in Minnesota, northern Minnesota, when there's snow, push off the snow from the top.
That's fantastic.
It's something, put it in your inventory of possibilities, because it is, we've been doing this for 15 years and it's phenomenally wonderful.
Absolutely. And I would love to do something like that. And hopefully one day I will. What I, you know, as a business owner running a construction business run into, which many DIY off-grid people don't run into, is following the code and getting inspections. Basically, if I ever install a solar PV system, most of it's got to be made of metal, you know, of the mounts and stuff. And if I ever try to, you know, make something custom, it needs an engineering approval, you know, and then an official engineering PE stamp put onto it that I got to show to the city or wherever the jurisdiction is. It's a lot looser, you know, in rural areas, which I'm a big fan of. And so I can get away with some stuff in those areas. There we go. Absolutely. But yeah, I'm a huge fan. Hudson's house that you saw with those panels that were tilted up, huge fan of that, you know, with these creative custom solutions to put panels in areas where, you know, they get the most sunlight.
Are those panels flat?
These ones right here, they're actually tilted 15 degrees. And they're actually, there's no holes in the roofs at all. We have it ballasted on the roof. So there's just cement blocks that are just holding it to the roof itself.
When it goes, it's gonna all go.
Hey, we have engineering approval that says it won't. You gotta understand.
You need a strong roof for that too.
You do, yeah. So whenever, and this is for all houses we put solar on, we can't just look at it and say, oh yeah, let's put solar on there. We do have to go look inside the attic, take pictures of, you know, the roof reinforcements, and actually make an educated decision on, will this extra 5 pounds of pounds per square foot.
What do you figure per square foot roughly?
5 pounds per square foot, roughly. Obviously, it changes depending on the system.
100 pounds of snow.
Exactly. Yeah. When it comes to comparing it like that, and then also solar panels are made to wick snow off them the best they can. So if you do put panels on a pitched house, snow will more easily fall off of it. We'll get a little bit more of that later. Hudson, we can continue. see what we have. So the hot topic that everyone loves to talk about here is the finances of solar and how expensive it is. And I won't say that it's not expensive. Solar panels, they do take a considerate amount of investment. Some people pay, over $100,000 for a huge 40 kilowatt system, or some people end up paying around $10,000-15,000 for a smaller 10 panel system on their garage or something. In the end, whenever we try to, put it in perspective on what these solar investments look like is, if you're going to pay, say, $10,000 for a solar system, then your utility bills that you pay less in. So say, if you usually spend $100 a month on utility electrical costs, and you put in solar panels that cover that electrical cost, then you're saving $100 a month. And then if you just put that in a cash flow diagram, in 8 to 9 years, it'll pay itself off. Right now in Ely and the surrounding northern Minnesota, with Minnesota Power, Lake Country Power, depends of course on the utility and how much they're actually charging you for electricity. These payback periods can change drastically. Right now it's looking 10 to 12 years is the usual payback period for when your solar panels will save you enough money from reduced electrical bills from that upfront payment. But the part that I really like to focus on is these panels last a very, very long time. And so most of this equipment has 25-year warranties. That doesn't mean that they're going to last for 25 years. That means the manufacturer is certain that for at least 25 years, they will get you a new panel if something goes wrong with it.
Is that the Minnesota manufacturer or several?
That is the industry standard for solar panels.
Oh, really?
Yes, absolutely.
Oh,
And there's even more manufacturers that are bumping it to 30 and so. And you can still see panels, from the early 90s and 2000s that are still working to this day. And those panels are, don't actually have like the knowledge, that the solar panel manufacturers today know of, because the technology was in its infancy back then. So it's always looking good when you're talking about how long solar panels will last. And then a huge part of all this is incentives, right? Because there's always a lot of incentives, financial incentives to put solar panels on your residential property. The big one is the 30% federal solar tax credit, which is basically whatever you pay for a solar PV system, 30% of that you can get back in tax credits. So that's not necessarily you just get cash back for them. Whatever you pay in federal taxes, you can reduce with these tax credits from buying a solar PV system. And we're very lucky, and we're going to go over this in a future slide, but in the state of Minnesota, we have 1-to-1 net metering, which is a law in Minnesota that requires utilities to pay you back for the excess solar that you push back onto the grid. Because usually when you install these systems, during the hot sunny days at noon, it will be producing more power than your house is actually using. So you're sending electricity back to the grid and your neighbors are actually using that electricity, but you still get paid for it.
So for example, here in Minnesota, if I pay 12 cents per kilowatt hour, Minnesota Power has to pay me back 12 cents for every kilowatt hour I push onto the grid. But if you go to Wisconsin and you're on a co-op, they could charge you 12 cents per kilowatt hour and give you 3 cents per kilowatt hour. If you go to Arizona, it's even worse than that, which is why the great state of Arizona, which shouldn't have anything but solar power, has almost no solar industry at all, because they have the worst possible rates for people who want to put solar on their houses. And they want to push people off grid by being total jerks at it. Also, can we, before the new IRA was passed, this was only a tax break, so you had to owe taxes to get the money back. But as of 2 years ago, now your church, your school, your city,
municipalities,
all these entities that do not pay taxes can get a payout of 30% of what it costs, which is a huge innovation. And if you look around the city of Ely, churches have great roofs, so it has been a big problem that they've always been the institutions that want to do this, but it never made a lot of sense for them, and now it makes a lot more sense.
Absolutely.
Does that include government buildings or you don't know?
It includes government buildings,
It
yeah.
does?
Get the money back.
Like the college?
Like
Where did
municipalities
all
and
that-
such. Yes,
state college?
like nonprofits and such.
I have a question, maybe it's almost a philosophical thing, but the companies are basically forced to, give you electricity whenever you want it. And they gotta buy it from you at the same price, whether they want it or not. Okay, I mean, it seems like we're taking advantage of the system.
Well, you know, that is one perspective. The other thing is the reason these laws are in place is because, you know, as a community, we are attempting to put in more and more renewables on the grid.
No, I'm
And
all
in
for
a business perspective, I'm sure a lot of these utilities would not know solar at all. But for, you know, allowing more people to put in investments in solar electricity, this is the way to go about it.
If I could provide them, with, solar power, 24 hours a day in November, they pay a lot for it. But I can't provide what they really need.
Mhm, mhm.
And as they try to put more solar into their system, they're gonna have the same problem. It'll become a real good way of running solar from Arizona to Minnesota.
So the way Minnesota's law is passed, net metering only goes up to a small system on your house.
Oh,
And
okay.
after that, they don't have to pay you the same amount.
Correct, yeah, this is
So
just
that's
for
how it goes.
40 kilowatts and less.
Yeah, so they don't cry too many tears for
Oh,
the
okay.
investor-owned utilities that make a guaranteed 10% profit off of you every year. They make a lot of good money off of this system, and yes, they don't like net metering, but they also
I don't work for
control the
them.
system.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't want their system to collapse, right? Because we rely on them. because They're legal monopolies. So like, yeah, they're keeping my lights on too. But this is only up to a 40 kilowatt system, and he covered every surface of my roof with panels, and I have an 11 kilowatt system.
Oh, okay.
So it takes this.
Yeah,
whole
40
building-
kilowatts is about 100 solar
This whole
panels.
building could do 100, or could do 40 kilowatts, maybe.
And I will say it's either 40 kilowatts or 120% of, you know, whatever property's usage is. So if there is, you know, a big industrial plant that uses a lot of electricity, they can still get the benefits from it. Anyways,
Another
continue.
question just on the panels.
Yes.
I did it about 15 years ago, and back then, a lot of the panels were degrading a fair amount per year.
Hmm.
Now, this is a longer insurance on them, 25 years, you said, that's great. So how did they up
The degradation.
degradation?
Yep, there is still degradation. On average, it's about 0.5% per year for that 25. So by the end of, at the end of like 25 years, they will produce approximately like 80% of what they did when they were brand new. All right. And they have that in their warranties where it's like, it shows a graph. It's like your panels will produce this much. And it kind of goes down at, like I said, 0.5% per year for the longevity of the
That's really
system.
good. I was told by the installer that put in the one at the casino down at Big Bear or Bear,
Yeah.
Black
Yeah.
Bear, that those degraded up to 7% a year.
Oh, wow.
And they're, Chinese
sound right.
manufacturer.
That doesn't make, nobody who would put them in, that
No,
doesn't make
it
sense.
doesn't.
Yeah, I haven't heard of that, but yeah, definitely something to always consider is the degradation. Whenever we make our proposals for customers, that is a factor. Whenever we make those cash flow diagrams,
Okay.
it includes that degradation factor of the panels. It also includes, you know, over time, utility electrical prices increase. They have been for forever, as long as utilities have been around. So usually, you know, as you know, we get further into the climate crisis and such, those prices are going to get higher and higher and higher. So, you know, putting in panels, you know, for your business or for your residential home, it is kind of, you know, betting that utility prices will rise. And in my opinion, obviously, no one can see in the future. You know, that's a surefire thing that's going to happen.
I think.
Yeah. Anyways, yes.
Is it, when you're making, more electricity than you use,
and you're selling it back or giving, is there a charge or a fee for that, or did there used to be and there is no longer?
So it's different per utility. For the ones around here, Lake Country Power and Minnesota Power, there's not. When you install a solar system, you actually sign a contract with your utility, and you actually have a bunch of different options to choose from. And some of them do include, having a $20 fee per month for you able to do this. But yeah, the ones around here are actually really nice, and they don't have a fee. And we'll go over, how a utility building works in the future
Still
slide here.
that net, what do you call it?
Net metering?
Net metering, yeah.
Correct.
So-
That's a statewide thing.
Okay.
Especially if you run an electric co-op, they sometimes have that extra charge.
No one's on a fucking co-op.
Did you say something, Richard, from the Zoom?
Nope.
All right. Well, on the next slide here, I just want to kind of go over what me and my team do day after day, at least during the spring, summer, fall seasons. We have decided not to install rooftop solar in the winter. I did used to do that at my old job. It was not fun. But as you can see in the left photo there, that's actually a system we installed in Cook, and that's a 2012 pitch roof. So that's about 60-degree angle. The house was specifically made for solar. It was specifically made for solar water heating. That didn't end up happening, and so we put in a solar photovoltaic system.
Taking sulfates.
Absolutely. And as you can see on the right, that's a picture of me on a 12-12 pitch roof. That's 45 degrees of tilt. And we're always roped in, but we have a system when we install these systems. You kind of saw it from that drone footage from Hudson's house. We put these panels on horizontal rails, right? So we build these rails and we kind of build from the bottom up, right? So if you have like a very steep roof, we'll build this bottom rail so that we can stand on it, build the next one, and then we build all the way up. And these are great because they're fantastic for when you have to go back and do any type of repairs. If there's ever something that goes wrong with the panel or anything underneath the panels, all you got to do is they're actually only clamped to these rails. And we just go up there with an impact driver, unzip a couple clamps so you can take panels on and off. And these systems are also made so that inevitably 20, 30 years in the future, if you need to re-shingle a roof, they can completely be taken down, completely be put back up like they're made for. On to the next. So the panels are always pretty to look at, but it's also good to know that there are other electrical stuff going on with these systems. And here are two examples. At the ground level, you'll have some electrical boxes. Sometimes it's an inverter, sometimes it's just electrical breaker boxes. And luckily in my experience, installing grid-tied solar systems is a lot more simple than an off-grid setup, which sometimes you'd be surprised about, because really all it is you're putting solar panels somewhere on a roof, on the ground, you're just hooking them up to an inverter, and then that plugs into your breaker box in your house. It's just a single breaker.
Really?
And then that's it. Plain and simple. The one on the left is really nice. One of the small things that we have to do that electrical code requires is have a safety switch that turns the system on and off. But really, all it was for this system on the left was panels going to an inverter, going to a safety switch, plugging in right into someone's
Oh,
house.
it's the black button on the bottom.
That's just a switch. That's the DC switch that turns the inverter DC side on and off.
Okay.
So the one on the left, though, that's a little bit more of a complicated system where we had batteries. So it involved a lot more, a system controller, several different disconnects. And so depending on the system you get, there's always a lot of electrical stuff that goes on. Most of the time, it's all on the outside of a house. Electrical code usually requires these safety switches to always be on the outside of the house. And so I've never really had a problem with it, but it's good to know that, solar systems always have a lot going on the backside of things as well.
Where are the batteries in that picture?
So on the one on the right, the batteries are actually on the inside of the garage. Because, installing batteries outside, you can usually want to keep them warm.
Okay.
So they're actually like directly on the other side of the wall. Anyways, you can continue then, Hudson. See what else we got here. So yeah, let's dig into net metering and utilities here. And the pictures in the bottom left is actually an old meter where they had a spinning wheel, and electricity is measured in kilowatt hours. So when you see your bill and it has, the numbers for, how much electricity you used, those are measured in kilowatt hours. The picture on the right is what's called a smart bidirectional meter, and these are being installed in pretty much all utility areas at this point. They're all electronic. They send their data to the utility via radio transmitter or something like that. But these new meters, they will record energy coming in and energy coming out, and it knows, it records both ways. Whereas the old one, it just has a single wheel, and then the wheel says, okay, you're using, and now you're not, and then all you see is kind of the difference. And so these new meters give the utilities a lot more information, but when it comes down to your bill at the end of the month, they keep it simple. This net metering policy is really made to keep things simple. To put in perspective, you have a house with solar. You use, say, 100 kilowatt hours of electricity in your house, your refrigerator, your loads that you use, and your solar panels, they produce, let's say, 150 kilowatt hours, 50 kilowatt hours more. Throughout the month, it doesn't matter when that solar was created or when you used that electricity. It's just at the end of the month, they take those total numbers and they take the difference, and that's what you pay. So in the example I just gave, there was a surplus of 50 kilowatt hours. Therefore, you get paid for 50 kilowatt hours of solar. In an example where your solar produced less than what you used, you just pay for that difference. Simple.
Is that monthly or does it over the course of the year?
It is monthly.
Now, I have a question of like the city of Ely. We don't have a power company, we have a city of Ely. Have you done that, the net metering with the city of Ely?
I have not done it specifically with the city of Ely. I have done it with the Virginia Power and Light Company before. They're similar, where the city controls the electrical billing. They basically usually, they just buy their electricity from these bigger companies. They are held to the same rules for net metering because it's a state policy, and there is like a standard solar contract that a lot of these different utilities and municipalities use. And so, yeah, the answer to the question is simply, yeah, they are held to the same standards as what I just explained.
And Ely gets all of its electricity from Minnesota Power, so
Right.
your interconnection process would be pretty similar to what mine was with Minnesota Power. But you would talk to somebody at the city of Ely, whereas we talked to somebody who works in Duluth.
Absolutely.
Good.
So what this net metering means is, the expectations for buying these grid-tied solar PV systems, since they're paid out monthly, we are going to build these systems, whenever I meet somebody and we're trying to plan out their solar system, they have a lot of options for the amount of solar to put on the house. And the majority of the time, people just want to put solar on their house so that it will cover 100% of what they use. And we usually have like the last year or so years worth of their electrical usage data. And I can kind of plug that into my spreadsheets and I can say, okay, you need 25 solar panels. And with these panels, in the summer months, you are going to overproduce. And at the end of those months, the utility is going to pay you. But then in the winter months, you will not be able to produce as much because the sun is lower on the horizon and the weather is not as good. But by the end of the year, the net totals equal out. And that's usually how we design these systems, if that makes sense.
So now you would design it it would make sense. You design it for summer. You design it for.
We design it for the whole year. Like I said, we have the tools to predict how much solar power is going to be generated in the summer, fall, spring, and winter. And then we just take that whole thing and we just make sure that the total amount of kilowatt hours produced in the year equals the total amount of kilowatt hours used in the year, knowing that it'll overproduce in the summer, underproduce in the winter.
So when I was an Excel Energy customer in St. Paul, Minnesota, we got solar on our house for 7 months out of the year or so, they would give us a $0 bill and tell us that they owed us money.
Mhm.
And then in the winter, because they were also our gas utility, we owed them money. So they would just hold on to our money for us because they're a nice little monopoly. And they eventually took it back once we didn't have a surplus with them anymore. We moved up here in the winter time. We moved up here in the summertime. So they still owe us $16, and I get an email every month telling me that I have to pay my Excel Energy bill for negative $16. They have not figured out how to give me my money back. That's a failure in the system, but yes, it's really nice, because in the summer, you're just like, I'm gonna waste as much electricity as I want, because basically you're producing enough to offset all of your own usage, and then some.
There's so many questions I got. If you had a good sized 112 north pit, so nearly flat but north, can you work something on that? That would make sense.
Yeah, there's obviously a lot of routes you can go down, but and we'll have a couple slides about the whole thing in this area is snow, right? If you have a system that's just flat, the snow will come. Hey, like I see, it's the next slide. You want to have them tilted around 35 degrees, in my opinion, is ideal. Even more to 45, 50 degrees might even be better in some situations. But for a regular pitch roof, 612 pitch, which is around 27 degrees, the data that the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, they do tests where they put panels in all the different parts of the country, and then they have some data on snow. And when it comes down to it, the snow will reduce the total amount of energy for the year by around 10% on average. And that's a significant amount, but it's, I try to let people form their own opinions,
You mean if you don't shovel it off?
Yes, that is when you don't shovel it off, you just let it stay there. In the Twin Cities, it's around 5%, they don't get as much snow. Of course, whenever I install panels around here, there is nothing wrong with, getting that 10% back. With a roof rake, you can obviously take the panels off. If they're on your deck, just push them down. But a lot of people do elect to just put the panels up and then just take the loss of 10%. And a lot of the times simply add 10% more panels. For the finances of it.
That's usually that's a very good solution.
Yeah. For it works very well for grid tied systems. Unfortunately, it doesn't work as well for off grid systems. That's a whole different ballgame. But a lot of these ground mount systems that I get, there's a type of ground mount that's called a tilt angle ground mount, where the solar panels can actually change direction. The only problem is those mounts cost a lot more. And when it comes down to finances, where you're just trying to figure out, if I only have, X amount of money to build a system, how can I make the most amount of electricity with this money? And in the end, it's simply a fixed system with just the most amount of panels as you can, because we've gone to the day and age where the panels are actually cheap enough, where it's just financially better to just put in more panels rather than monkey with trying to go a mechanical route to angle them in different
How
angles.
does that work? We were talking to some guy over in Grand Rapids, and they were talking like 17 acres, or it was big anyway. And
those tilt.
Yeah,
They work
I
well
will
already.
say when it comes to commercial grade ones, it is a little different. You can get it so that it's not a seasonal adjust tilt where it just changes, it's facing south, but it's the angle towards the south. A lot of these commercial ones, they'll actually tilt west and east so that they actually track the sun during every single day. I see that quite a bit for commercial installations. They can make that work.
My question was, in some places, how much they can put in is limited by how much space they have, like on my roof.
Absolutely. And then that's a whole nother situation too. If you only have a certain limit amount, that's a whole different restriction, and you're gonna have to come with a creative solution.
The hardware to gimbal them and follow the sun, it just seems like that's the way NASA would do it.
That is the way NASA does it in space, because they have limited amount of space. That's the way they did it 10, 20 years ago, because panels are really, really expensive.
Okay.
And so that's just the way the world has come to.
I've seen a lot of those locked in the wrong position because all mechanism failed, and then you have to.
Earlier
Get
on,
fixed
I mean,
and-
that was a big issue, that, you know, you put the ones that would track and pretty soon they bust and so you're stuck. And so like you say, just get more panels and put them up.
Absolutely. When I go to the next slide here, I think it's the maintenance slide. Yeah, so the best part, I don't know about the best part, but one of my favorite parts of these systems is that there's no moving parts. Therefore, they're very reliable, very, very reliable. The panels are made to go up on a roof and then you can kind of just forget about them. You don't have to put oil in them every year or so or anything like that. They're a way to passively create electricity. They make no noise. There's sometimes like a very small buzz in the inverter, but that's what they're made for. And the only optional maintenance, like I said, is to brush snow off. But of course, that's always optional. And then of course, as we talked about before, the panels are just getting better and better when it comes to the reliability and the quality engineering that goes into them to make sure that the degradation is very consistent from year to year. I actually took a tour of the solar power plant in Mountain Iron, the Helene solar panel plant, and they have those panels just turning out, you know, left and right through these big machines, and then they get to the very, very end of this big complicated process where they flash like a huge beam of light at the panel, and then they take an infrared camera, they make sure that there's no points on that panel that have any hot spots, and they record the total amount of electricity that was made with that one flash, and they separate the panels into these different piles. They're like, okay, this panel made exactly in between 400 and 405 watts, and this one made 10 watts more, this one, and then they sell them in those different categories. And then if they go even a little tiny bit less, they throw them into a pile where they say, no warranty on these, and you can buy them at half price.
Like toilet paper coming off.
Yeah.
They don't make like cookies.
There is still some manual, you know, literally people just
Yeah.
like putting parts on them, which is
No, I mean, once you
interesting.
cut it, but I mean, is the material, as they're fabricating, is it made like in the continuous roll? Continuous roll.
I don't think they're making the silicon wafers.
Yeah, no, at least in
They're putting the panels
the
together
Helene
there.
plant, you know, they get in the little wafers of silicon, and yeah, I don't exactly know how they do it. I
But
saw the
anyway,
machines,
they're gonna get cheaper and better without a doubt.
100%. So, anyway, we'll continue there. So now we get to the part of the presentation where we go into, you know, the finances of solar panels are great, but in the end, you know, the reason, you know, it's so important is the sustainability aspect of renewable energy in general. And 10 kilowatts of solar panels, which is about 25 solar panels or so, it does a really good. I guess you can't see at the top. I think that's 5 tons of coal, and it will offset the same amount of carbon as 10 forested acres, and 25 solar panels will offset the amount of emissions as about 25,000 vehicle miles driven in a regular car. Obviously, those are, I got these calculations from the EPA website, which is the greenhouse gas calculator. But as you can see, you know, sometimes it seems a little, you know, like an individual can't do much to, you know, offset, you know, because everyone lives their life, and we're always going to be offsetting carbon. We breathe it, we drive, we eat foods, and we use products that are all using carbon to be created and to be used. But I think these panels are a great way to chop off like 70-60% of what you use.
You don't drive 25,000 miles on top of it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And right now, we haven't reached the point, you know, at least in northern Minnesota, where the utilities have a problem with their grid infrastructure, right? Because once a certain amount of solar gets onto the grid, there gets to be a point, you know, in the middle of summer on a very sunny day, where if there's too many solar panels, sometimes the grid can get overloaded.
I never even thought of it from,
Yep,
from the wrong end.
Yeah, exactly. So that is something that, you know, other parts of the country are kind of experiencing, and so they're putting a lot of restrictions. We're nowhere near that in this area. So whatever solar energy, you know, is put in the state is really just one for one making coal powered and gas powered power plants just run a little bit less, which is nice. And we got questions, yes.
Those statistics include the carbon cost of building solar panels.
That's a fantastic question. These ones are just straight up the amount of kilowatt hours offset by the panels. When it comes to offsetting the cost for making the solar panels, a lot of research has been done in this, and the answer is it depends on the manufacturer. This is kind of what it boils down to, you know, whether you're getting panels from. But yeah, in a very general term, we see people say it's low as 2 years. We people say it's low as 5 to 10 years. And so, fortunately, I don't have a great answer for that. But given these systems last for 25 plus years, it's still one of our best bets for finding ways to offset carbon emissions.
I've heard that if you got multiple areas of your array for a single residence, that this part of the array,
You're facing different directions.
yeah, if they're facing different directions, then the efficiency goes way down. Has that been accounted for, or has that been improved, or?
So yeah, when it gets boiled down to the optimal angle to point a solar panel is south, right?
Yeah.
And so if you have panels that are not facing directly south, inevitably they will just be less efficient simply because less sunlight hits it.
Okay, not what I meant. So you got panels like this.
Okay.
When this one is getting more power and this one is getting less power, I was told on some installations that both will only do the weak, this will only equal the weak side.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
Okay.
And that is true for older systems. You're talking about a system that uses a string inverter. There's many different types of inverters. But if you use a string inverter, it's important that all of your panels are facing the same direction, because you are correct. If you have multiple panels on a single string and they're facing different directions, inside these inverters, they have what are called power point trackers, and they optimize, that string based on, how the sunlight is hitting it, and it assumes all the panels have the same amount of sunlight hitting it. There's a workaround, and the vast majority, including Hudson systems we just installed, every single panel underneath it has a device that makes all of the panels isolated from each other. So if one panel is facing a different direction or is covered in dirt or something, it will not affect the other panels.
Okay.
Now I've got a question. If you don't put your panels on the roof, but maybe your best solar site is 50 yards away, how much power do you lose between the panels and getting it to the house?
Absolutely. So that phenomenon is called voltage drop, and that's more of a it's not just a solar issue, it's an electrical issue in general, and it's talked about when it comes to the grid, when you're transporting power miles and miles around. In the end, whenever, right now, like the general thing is, if we put wires in the ground, we want 3% or less loss. And if you have, 50, 100 yards of power that you need to bring from your solar system to your house, it's just the upfront cost of the wire. Because if you have a really, really thick wire and you're running it, 100 yards, it's not a big deal.
So
2-3%
you
is
don't bump
fine.
the voltage up so that you.
That is another option. Typically for residential systems, the finances don't work for upping the voltage, simply because of material costs. It's as simply as the wires we use have to get bigger the longer you have to transmit electricity. And so that's always something I should talk with customers prior. If they have a system that's 100 yards away, we have to talk about, well, if it is 100 yards away, we're going to need to put 4-aught aluminum as your wires between it, and that costs $3 a foot. Whereas if we have it 60 feet away from your house, then we can use 6-gauge wire, and that is 50 cents a foot, right? So that's usually what we end up talking about when it comes to that.
But digging a trench for that wire is the problem.
That digging the trenches, of course, another. And I'm one of the few I don't know if I'm one of the few installers, but I make a lot of deals with my clients where I'm like, you can dig the trench and I will discount this quite a bit. I'm gonna go a little bit further into the reason and the core reason, why renewables are so important, and the climate crisis is a very, very large threat to humanity as a whole. This graph here is the amount of carbon dioxide levels in the air from, as you can see, 800,000 years ago to today. And a big question that I want to talk about very briefly is like, how the heck do we know this? And scientists from all around the world are taking samples in glaciers, rocks, coral reefs, and they can use the the levels of these layers to see, how things were hundreds of thousands of years ago. And it is pretty crazy that the amount of carbon is double today than what it was for basically forever. You can go to the next slide here. What does that mean, though, having more carbon in the air? Having more carbon in the air contributes to the greenhouse gas effect. Sun coming in our atmosphere, and the large amount of carbon in the atmosphere traps that sunlight, making our Earth hotter and hotter. And it's very unfortunate, but the last couple of years, 2020, 2023, we've had a spike in the temperature of the Earth. And the scientists are trying to tell us that 1.5 degrees Celsius is what we call a tipping point in the Earth's temperature. And at that tipping point, ocean wind currents, large ice glacial meltings will reach a point of no return, where we can't reverse the impacts. And so this little graph here, most of the stuff I got from the NASA website shows, just what the temperature was in 0 is 1950, right? And so that 1.7 degrees Celsius change from today is just comparing it with 1950. So you can go to the next slide. And so it's always a difficult discussion, but a very, very important one on what we can do as individuals to, help fight this climate crisis. And it's all about high impact actions. All right. I really like to stress the importance of high impact actions, because a lot of people can get caught up with low impact actions, small things, like not that they're not important, but if you just focus on, like plastic straws, small stuff like that, you can get caught in the weeds. High impact actions are: one, putting solar panels on your house, get that big 60-70% chunk of your carbon emissions out of the way. Taking a look at your transportation, driving hybrid vehicles, electric vehicles are going to be the way forward to reduce the amount of gasoline that gets burned. Avoiding flights across the ocean, because that's a huge part of the transportation sector. And then the food industry for red meat, creating methane from animals going in the atmosphere, is also another huge chunk that is contributing to these greenhouse gases. And I believe that is it. My slogan for Sisu Solar is "the future is bright." And it's hard to say that after saying all that stuff there, but it is true. The sun is going to continue hitting the Earth, and might as well use that to our advantage.
Yes.
Well,
Excellent.
Thank you.
almost everyone in this group is very pro-nuclear.
Yeah, I'm preaching to the.
So the sun being a giant nuclear power plant.
I think the next slide too is that's the finished product at Hudson's house, where you're going to see it.
I want to thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks so much for
Yes,
inviting me
thank
here.
you.
Does anybody have any more questions though before we?
Oh, I got a lot of questions.
Absolutely.
Really? Do some people do it in stages at all? I mean, it seems like it makes sense to do the total package.
Yeah, it always is going to be the better financial return to just do it all up front. But obviously the high costs up front make it so that some people need to put some panels now, some panels in later.
It's been suggested that having a lot of small solar would make the grid just better and more stable and less outages. There's not enough yet to get that effect, you would just say?
Well, it goes back to that voltage drop issue. If we have a natural gas plant that's miles and miles away from your house, they need to, one, burn the gas to create the electricity, to create the steam, to turn the generator, and then push it miles and miles and miles to your house and then use it. if you have solar panels on your house
Okay,
that are
okay.
30 feet from where you're using your electricity,
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
obviously that's gonna be so much more efficient. And the inverters converting that DC electricity to AC, they're operating at around 98% efficiency. So it's quite nice. Solar panels themselves, of the actual energy of the sun hitting them, it's around a 22-23% conversion rate. That's the best we've got right now for
Yeah.
solar panels.
Oh, that's pretty good. So is that average or best? That's the best? you
Yeah,
got?
that's average right now, is
That's
like
average?
22%. Yep,
Yeah. Oh, okay.
it's quite nice.
I have a question.
Not yet, not yet. They're still doing 100% of what
Oh,
they're rated.
He'll talk you out of
If,
throwing it away.
like, for example, I have a cabin and I have a house in town. If, I call you and I say, I'm interested in putting solar panels up, so will you come out like to the cabin? And is there any chance you have to cut down trees?
Yeah, it's really unfortunate that, one of my greatest nemesis in the solar industry here is trees and snow, because I love them both.
Yeah.
I don't ever advocate for, chopping down trees to put panels in your house, because trees increase the value of your home, and I don't want you to,
And
chop down
cool,
trees.
too.
And it keeps it cool
Yeah.
as well, absolutely. But there are some situations where people do choose to take down some trees. Going to that emission slide, given 25 panels offsets the same amount of carbon as 5 acres of forest. If you're looking at purely a carbon capture standpoint, it does make sense. But yeah, it's always a personal preference though.
But you come out and you make sort of a general estimate of what.
Yeah, I do this all the time. I'll be doing 2 tomorrow as a solar consultation. I will go out to somebody's house. I will go on the roof. I will measure their roof. Let's figure out how many rectangles we can fit on your house. That's a large portion of the engineering design that I do, is just figuring out how many rectangles will fit on a trapezoid shaped roof. Look inside your attic. As I said, make sure your house can actually handle more weight. And then look at your electrical box, breaker box, meter. How the heck are we going to connect solar to your house is always an important question.
From an efficiency perspective, how do the big companies feel? I mean, some of the big companies want to build big solar farms.
Yeah.
And then, of course, a lot of people want, their own solar at their house. So what's the arguments there? What's the thinking on it? What do you think?
Yeah, I think about that all the time. It is true, if you build a giant solar field, that is going to be more efficient than climbing up on a 2-story house to put 8 panels.
Okay.
You can build so
You
much
got the
faster.
acreage, you got the acreage.
Yeah, if you have the acreage, and if you can just start
Yeah.
slamming in posts in the ground, putting panels on them, that is by far one of the cheapest electricity sources we can get these days. And that is, companies are doing that all over the world. Unfortunately, they're not getting paid back as much as a residential house does.
Yeah.
But the argument for residential houses, because some people will say, well, let's not even put panels on our house because it's going to be so much less efficient than putting 1,000 panels in an acre farm. It's the government perspective is, they want to spend their money so that we can have as much, renewable as possible. And in their mind, having, individuals put some of that bill is a good deal for them. So if an individual pays for 70% of it, okay, they'll pay for 30%, which is kind of what that government 30% tax credit is for.
But you do lose a large amount or percentage for long distance transmission. I think the last figure I remember nationally about long distance transmission was something like 22% of all the power is lost just going from, one area to the other. So having it on your house is more efficient in some way.
Absolutely.
Another thing to think about in terms of the long-term transmission is that, if it's on your house, it just comes to your house.
Yeah.
But when you think about some of these places like out in California, where they turn off the grid during dry Santa Ana winds because transmission lines are transmitting this dangerous stuff called electricity, which is actually just fire. It's really and so it's not like they're just benign little things, these big transmission lines. There's a lot of
a lot of stuff that goes into it, that's for sure.
yeah. So that's something to think about, and
Yeah.
from the safety standpoint.
Yep.
So
Do
one of the-
you
one of the big
install,
groups Go ahead.
Do you install mostly local made panels from Helene, or do you put Chinese panels up?
I'm
or-
very happy to say that like this next year, 2025, I went to a solar conference where the Lean people had a stand, and I've asked them many times, can I use your panels? Can I use your panels? And they usually sell in bulk to big companies. And so they don't even want to mess with small installers unless I buy a shipping container's worth of them. But I did get in contact. I found a very nice lady named Angela who said, because you're local, because you can just drive your truck straight to the plant and pick up some panels, this will be the first year we'll actually be able to utilize those panels, which is great. Those panels are commercial size panels. It adds another layer of complexity though, because usually when we put a panel on a house, they are 30 pounds per panel. Like commercial panels are 40, 50 pounds. So, you know, yeah.
Heavier sheet of plywood.
Hmm?
It's a heavier sheet of plywood.
Exactly.
So
Exactly. So,
what is the size of the panels?
I was around 6.5 by 3.5 feet.
Okay.
But yeah, when it comes to like the entire materials and, you know, what are we getting from China? What are we getting? Right now I'm getting my panels from a distributor called Green Tech Renewables, and they have a wide selection of panels. Some from China, some of them made in Malaysia, Indonesia, those places. But yeah, right now, most of the solar panels are imported. There is some plants in Florida and Georgia making panels that I've also put on as well. So if it really is, you know, an influential factor for somebody who wants panel on their house, we can get it from, because right now there is not actually any tariff issues right now like there was a couple of years ago, and there is going to be. I guess in the future, you know, now that I say it out loud, it could change, could definitely change. Right now, we're doing okay though.
People are fans.
Yeah.
You probably already answered it, but we've been talking with the school about solar for schools and the question of where to locate things. Rooftops are there, but it sounds like from what we're saying, having them on multiple rooftops even, it makes more sense than having a solar field if you have the space for it.
Well, and when it comes to the cost, and for a big building, usually the amount of roof space is not enough to cover 100%, but a lot of times, you know, the field space can be used for other stuff, and people don't want solar panels, you know, in the field right next to a school or a building. And so
Ground is a premium around here.
it's around here.
Maybe, but
Parking lots.
Yeah, and in the end, it's always a big financial decision, because it would be perfect if we could just cover all the parking lots with solar panels, but to do that, we need to get big heavy metal beams to lift the panels up 10 feet off the ground so we can have our cars under them. And that's all extra costs that people have to think about. So when it comes to giant systems, having a field, putting in little metal sticks in the ground to put the panels, that usually is the cheapest option. If you have a giant roof, it can actually get a little cheaper if, you know, because that system, the picture that I showed you before, no holes in the roof. It's just put a bunch of cement blocks up there and just weigh them down to the roof. That requires the building to be able to handle that extra weight though.
I did try to talk Ricky into the world's largest carport. First of all, there was the trench digging issue, but second of all, my come to God moment was, how am I gonna explain this to my plow guys? If you put something like that on a parking lot, you also have a very dangerous truck with a giant hunk of steel on the front of it flying around in the proximity of those things. And right now, you know, at the library parking lot, they have not hit the car chargers yet, but imagine putting in numerous metal poles in the area and having to like clear between the solar panels, because they won't be a continuous roof or anything. And if they were a continuous roof, they would break potentially. So anyway.
In the end though, you know, putting the panels on carports is a thing, and it is done all over. And I love seeing it. It just costs a lot.
Hey, it's 5 o'clock. I think we should wind it up. And thanks, Ricky, once again.
Thank you. Yeah, appreciate you. Thanks so much.
And please come next month. Hopefully Ricky can join us by Zoom. We'll talk more about distributed generation, transmission lines. Basically, I will watch this recording and then make another presentation about solar that answers all the stuff we brought up.